Okay, I'm going to start with a few really super basic things about watercolor that are helpful. What you should always have with you when you're going to do a watercolor project. Your paint set. Mine looks a little different than your paint set, but it's over here. Your palette, a container for water. I'm using just a plastic thing. You could use a glass jar or whatever you like. Pencils, eraser. Always have paper towels. Always have something to mop up the water. It's really important, and I notice in the classroom a lot of students forget that part. Okay, so one basic, get your brush wet and with clean water, and I'm going to wet the area within this circle right here with just clean water. That's a really good way to create a smooth, even wash of one color. Just be really careful that you keep all of the water within the boundaries that you want your color to stay. So that's wet. Let it kind of soak in. Now I'm going to use a little bit of blue. I've already touched the blue paint with my brush, the wet brush, and mix it into a little bit of water in my palette. So I have a fairly light value of blue. I could test it right here. Testing is a really good way just on the edge of your paper or a test paper somewhere, just to see how dark it is before you start. This is a very light value. Once I put it in here to the circle that's already been wetted with clean water, my color the pigment will smoothly travel around within the boundaries. It will not go outside of that circle. You can see there's a little bit of a puddle there, so this is an important thing. Clean out my brush here, mop, just squeeze it with a paper towel so that the brush is still damp. That will act like a little vacuum. It sucks up the excess water. Squeeze it out again. This is a really good trick. It's very, very basic, I know, but it is an important thing to know about. When you want a really smooth, light value wash to be to dry on your page, you can't have any puddles of water with pigment floating around in it, or it will not dry evenly. So I'm going to move this around. You can see it's wet, but it doesn't have a puddle. So that will dry as a very light value. Now, if we're going to do a value chart, I would leave alone the first box and get clean water in the whole space where I want the light value to be. Make sure my brush stays within the boundaries there. Wet the whole space. Preparing it to take in the pigment, and if your paper is just a little bit damp, the pigment's going to dry smoother. It'll be an even value throughout. So now that I have that wet and it's settling in a little bit, I have just a little bit of the very light blue. I'm going to put some more water in it, and this will be a super light value. It usually dries just a little bit lighter than it looks when it goes on wet. So now I reload my brush every once in a while and try to make that an even value throughout. Okay. Going to let that sit and dry evenly. If it looks too wet in some places, I'll just squeeze the brush and mop up some of those excess puddles of water. This whole assignment is a very good exercise in learning to control watercolor. And you have to have patience. You have to let that dry totally before you start with the next dark value about here, bringing it all the way down. It's probably going to take half an hour unless I get out my hairdryer. Once this water, there's too much water in it right now to use a hairdryer, but I could start to dry it once all of that water really soaks in. You can see on the circle now, it's not as shiny anymore. So the water has soaked in and I could use a hairdryer on that part.